My incompetent boss tried to fire me for his $2 million mistake. So I exposed him with math he couldn't lie about. I was staring at a completely fabricated, career-ending termination email from my direct manager, copied to our chief executive officer and our most lucrative $2 million corporate client, officially blaming me for a missed deadline that I had explicitly met 72 hours prior. My fingers hovered over the keys of my mechanical keyboard, the RGB lighting reflecting off my glasses, but my heart wasn't racing with the icy panic of a man about to lose his livelihood. It was beating with the cold, methodical, and utterly ruthless rhythm of an executioner preparing to pull a digital lever. I work as a senior data architect for an international financial analytics firm. My daily existence is buried beneath mountains of unstructured data, neural network training loops, and complex SQL database migrations. I don't deal in corporate buzzwords or motivational synergy. I deal in absolute, unyielding mathematics. When our largest client, a massive hedge fund, demanded a bespoke, predictive risk model to analyze overseas market volatility, the entire crushing weight of the project fell squarely onto my shoulders. For 3 agonizing weeks, my life was a blur of absolute misery. I worked 18-hour days, living off stale breakroom coffee and protein bars, staring at thousands of lines of Python code until my eyes felt like they were filled with crushed glass. I built an incredibly elegant, highly predictive machine learning model from scratch. The final deliverable was a massive, interactive dashboard accompanied by a highly detailed, 40-page technical breakdown. It was a masterpiece of data science. The hard deadline for the client was Wednesday at noon. I finished the compile on Sunday night at 3 a.m. Knowing the absolute critical nature of the contract, I delivered the final, polished report directly to my boss, Preston, on Monday morning at exactly 9:02 a.m. to allow for what he called a managerial final review. Preston was the quintessential corporate parasite. He was a manager by PowerPoint who possessed absolutely zero technical skills, yet he had managed to fail upward into a director-level position purely by aggressively stealing credit for his subordinates' work. Preston couldn't tell you the difference between a CSV file and a JPEG if his life depended on it. He wore perfectly tailored, slate-gray suits, soaked himself in expensive cologne, and spent his days taking 3-hour, networking lunches, while the actual engineers bled out on their keyboards to hit his arbitrary metrics. I walked into his pristine, glass-walled corner office on Monday morning, holding a physical flash drive as a backup to the digital payload I had just dropped into his inbox. The predictive risk model is completely finished, Preston, I stated, my voice hoarse from the weekend's absolute lack of sleep. It's in your inbox. The neural network is fully trained. The client presentation is locked. You have 48 hours to review the executive summary before the Wednesday handoff. Just drop it in my inbox, Damien. I need to deeply massage the data so the client can actually digest it, he hissed, not even bothering to look up from his iPhone screen, waving his hand in a dismissive, swatting motion as if I were a pest. The raw numbers are useless without my strategic narrative. The data doesn't need massaging, Preston. It is algorithmically balanced and strictly bound by the client's parameters, I whispered, the muscles in my jaw tightening so hard my teeth ground together. Do not alter the core architecture. He finally looked up, flashing me a patronizing, sickeningly bright smile. I'm the director of analytics, Damien. I'll decide what the client sees. Now close the door on your way out. I'm busy. I walked back to my desk, staring at the flashing cursor on my monitor, feeling a dark, heavy intuition settling into my gut. Preston had a notoriously insidious habit of editing people's work, which usually involved changing the font, slapping his own name on the title slide, and presenting it to the executive board as his own personal brainchild. I wasn't going to let him steal 3 weeks of my blood, sweat, and sanity. I am a systems architect. I do not just send emails. I engineer environments. Before I had sent him that file at 9:02 a.m., I had embedded a highly specialized, completely invisible 1x1 tracking pixel directly into the header of the document. I then routed that pixel to a custom Python script I had running on a secure, partitioned server. It wasn't standard read receipt software that he could just click, ignore, on. The absolute second Preston double-clicked that attachment, the script silently executed a handshake with my server, logging the exact timestamp, his specific IPv4 address, his geolocation down to the zip code, and the device ID of his machine. But a tracking pixel wasn't enough to secure my intellectual property. I needed undeniable, cryptographic proof of the file's original state. Using standard cryptographic protocols, I ran the entire compiled report through a hashing algorithm. I generated a SHA-256 digital fingerprint of the file. For those unfamiliar, SHA-256 hash takes any digital file and translates its exact byte-for-byte contents into a completely unique, 64-character alphanumeric string. If you change change even a single comma, a single space, or a single pixel in that document, the resulting hash changes entirely. My terminal spit out the undeniable mathematical proof of my Monday morning deliverable. HS equals 6E3ASD, a long string like this. I saved the hash, locked the server log, and waited. Tuesday came and went. Wednesday, the day of the massive client deadline, arrived. I sat at my desk, watching my hidden server logs ping with activity. Preston was opening the file, over and over again. The logs showed he accessed the document exactly 14 times between Monday morning and Wednesday afternoon. He was reading it, dissecting it, and preparing his grand theft. The logs didn't just show that he was opening it. My script tracked file path destination changes. On Tuesday night, at exactly 10:14 p.m., my server registered a terrifying anomaly. The file wasn't just being opened on his company-issued MacBook. It had been transferred. Preston had forwarded the proprietary, highly confidential corporate document to an unencrypted external address, prestonconsulting@gmail.com. He had then forcefully renamed the file on his personal machine to Preston_risk_model_final_v2.pdf. He wasn't just going to present my work. He was actively staging the document on his private consulting email, planning to leverage my predictive model during his upcoming performance review to justify a massive executive promotion, entirely scrubbing my existence from the metadata. I watched the clock hit 5 p.m. on Wednesday. The client deadline officially passed. Preston never submitted the file to the hedge fund. He had been so entirely consumed with reverse engineering my title slides to plaster his own name across the dashboard that he completely, catastrophically forgot to actually send a deliverable to the $2 million client. Which brings us to the absolute explosion on Thursday morning. At 8:45 a.m., the managing partner of the hedge fund called our CEO, Richard, in a state of absolute, unbridled fury. They were threatening to immediately terminate the $2 million retainer and initiate a lawsuit for breach of contract because their highly anticipated risk model was nowhere to be found. Preston panicked. He was a cornered animal who realized his sheer incompetence had just jeopardized the firm's largest revenue stream. Instead of admitting he missed the deadline because he was busy plagiarizing my code, he immediately went on the offensive to save his own skin. At 9:05 a.m., my inbox chimed. It was an email from Preston, sent with the highest possible priority flag. He didn't just email me. He utilized the reply alt function, deliberately copying Richard, the CEO, the entire executive board, and the managing partner of the hedge fund. I opened the email, and I felt the heat rising in my neck and my vision went blurry with absolute, venomous rage as I read the words on my screen. Richard, client team, I am beyond embarrassed and profusely apologize for this unacceptable delay. Unfortunately, my senior data architect, Damien, completely missed the mandatory Monday deadline for the predictive risk model. I have been aggressively chasing him for days, but he has been entirely unresponsive and has failed to deliver any usable data. Because I refuse to let one employee's incompetence jeopardize our partners, I am formally initiating Damien's termination this morning for gross negligence and breach of contract. I am personally working around the clock to build this model from scratch and will have it to you by tomorrow. He was firing me on a public thread to a multi-million-dollar client to cover up his own fatal error. He was burning my entire professional reputation to the ground, relying on the classic corporate power dynamic where the executive board automatically believes the sharply dressed director over the quiet engineer in the server room. Wait, it gets worse. Because Preston's agonizingly arrogant email was just the appetizer for the absolute technological massacre I was actively pulling the pin on. Preston thought the file he had stolen was just a static PDF. He didn't realize that I had anticipated his deceit from the very beginning. I didn't call Preston to beg for my job. I didn't sprint down the hallway to HR. I opened the exact same email thread, securely attached my encrypted server logs, and composed my response. I made sure the CEO, the entire board of directors, and the client's managing partner were all explicitly retained in the to field. My fingers flew across the keyboard with the blistering speed of a man holding a royal flush. Hi Preston. I believe there is a catastrophic synchronization error with your Outlook client, or perhaps a severe lapse in your memory. I have attached the real-time access log from our internal security server. As you can clearly see on line 42, I delivered the fully completed predictive risk model to your exact inbox on Monday at 9:02 a.m. The server logs confirm that you successfully opened the global risk model exactly 14 times, starting Monday at 9:15 a.m. from your home IP address. More interestingly, my embedded security script flagged a critical, unauthorized external data breach. On Tuesday night at 10:14 p.m., you manually forwarded this highly proprietary corporate asset to an unsecured personal address, prestonconsulting@gmail.com. gmail.com and subsequently renamed the file to preston_risk_model_final_v2.pdf. I can only assume this severe violation of our NDA was an accidental CC. Furthermore, for the benefit of the executive board, I have attached the SHA-256 cryptographic integrity check. The hash value proves mathematically that the report has been sitting in your unread folder, fully completed and untouched by me, for exactly 72 hours while you attempted to rebrand it under your private LLC. The model is complete. It has been complete since Monday. Best regards, Damien. I clicked send. The silence in the office over the next 10 minutes was thick, heavy, and physically suffocating. I sat at my desk, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee, watching the seconds tick by on my taskbar. At exactly 9:22 a.m., the heavy glass door to my department violently swung open. Richard, our CEO, marched down the aisle. Richard was not a traditional, MBA-toting executive. He was a former back-end software developer who had built this company from a single server rack in his garage. He understood code. He understood metadata. And he understood when someone was lying to his face. He wasn't walking to my desk. He was marching directly toward Preston's glass office. Damien, get in here. Now, Richard barked, his voice echoing off the concrete ceilings. I stood up, adjusting my glasses, and walked into Preston's office. Preston was standing behind his mahogany desk, his face completely devoid of color, resembling wet, trembling parchment. The smug, arrogant aura he constantly projected had completely evaporated, replaced by the sheer, unadulterated terror of a man who realized he had just stepped on a digital landmine. Explain this email, Preston, Richard demanded, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that seemed to rattle the heavy glass walls of the office. He slammed his tablet onto Preston's desk, the screen displaying my massive, undeniable server logs. It's a glitch. Richard, you know these IT guys, they make things up. Preston screamed, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched squeal. Sweat was actively dripping down his collar, staining the expensive fabric of his suit. Damien is hacking my system. He's doctoring the logs to cover his own laziness. I never got that file. AST256 hash doesn't glitch. Preston, I replied smoothly, leaning against the doorframe, crossing my arms over my chest. It is a cryptographic certainty. You opened the file 14 times. The IP address mapped perfectly to your luxury condo downtown. You stole the document. You forwarded a proprietary, $2 million neural network to an unsecured, private Gmail server so you could scrub his name off the title slide. Richard yelled, entirely losing his composure. He pointed a shaking finger directly at Preston's chest. You deliberately lied to my biggest client, tried to fire my lead architect, and violated our absolute strictest data security protocols to feed your own massive ego. Richard, please, the intent was to streamline the client presentation, Preston pleaded, holding his hands up defensively, completely abandoning his hacking defense as the reality of the evidence crushed him. The intent was theft, and the result is catastrophic gross negligence, Richard interrupted coldly, his posture rigid with fury. That is exactly when I decided to drop the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. Actually, Richard, I said quietly, drawing both of their terrified gazes. The client already has the file. They have had it since Monday morning. Preston's jaw physically dropped. Richard blinked, completely thrown off guard. What are you talking about, Damien? Richard asked, his brow furrowing in confusion. I know Preston's habits, I explained, staring dead into Preston's panicked eyes. So, I wrote a secondary contingency into the script. I set up an automated safety sync. The absolute second Preston opened that file on Monday morning and triggered the tracking pixel, the script duplicated the entire unedited directory and silently pushed it to the secure, top-level executive cloud dashboard. The one only you and the client's managing partner have access to. It's been sitting in the client's secure repository for 3 days. They just didn't check the automated folder because Preston never sent them the formal notification email. Richard stared at me in absolute, stunned silence for 3 long seconds. Then, a slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. He looked back at Preston. You are terminated, Preston. Effective exactly right now, Richard stated, his voice completely devoid of any emotion. Your corporate access is revoked. You do not touch that keyboard. You do not pack your desk. You are going to stand in the hallway while security escorts you out of my building. Preston opened his mouth to argue, but the sheer, overwhelming weight of his own digital footprints crushed the words in his throat. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of absolute hatred and pathetic defeat. By 11:30 a.m., 2 burly security guards arrived at the glass office. They handed Preston a single, medium-sized cardboard box. They stood over him, watching his every move as he threw his expensive cologne, his framed motivational quotes, and his custom nameplate into the box. I stood at the end of the aisle, watching him take the walk of shame past 60 different cubicles. He didn't look up once. The fallout was completely nuclear. By 1 p.m., HR launched a full forensic audit of Preston's email archives. They discovered that he had been ghostwriting his entire department's output for over 2 years. He had systematically forwarded dozens of high-level reports, analytics models, and client briefs to his private email, scrubbing the names of junior engineers from the metadata, and submitting them to the executive board to secure massive annual bonuses. Because he had transferred proprietary financial data to an unsecured private server, the company's legal team immediately filed a massive civil suit against him for corporate espionage and breach of NDA. But my afternoon went significantly differently. At 2 p.m., I was pulled into the main executive conference room. Richard was sitting at the head of the table, his laptop open. On the massive projector screen was the managing partner of the hedge fund, joining via a secure video link. The client wasn't angry. In fact, he was absolutely thrilled. "Damien," the managing partner began, his voice booming through the ceiling speakers. "Richard just walked me through the security and accountability protocol you embedded in that risk model. I have never seen a data architect utilize cryptographic hashing to actively trace internal corporate leaks. The model you built is flawless, but the security infrastructure you designed to protect it is what I actually care about. I don't want another suit managing my account." The client looked directly into the webcam. "I want you as the lead account director for the remainder of this contract. You own this project now." Richard smiled, closing his laptop. He slid a crisp, white envelope across the heavy mahogany table toward me. "The board agrees," Richard said quietly. "That's a revised employment contract, reflecting your new title as lead director of analytics. And a $15,000 retention bonus, effectively immediately, for saving this firm from a $2 million lawsuit." I walked back to my desk, the heavy envelope sitting securely in my hand. The office was quiet, the oppressive, toxic aura that Preston constantly radiated completely scrubbed from the atmosphere. I sat down in my ergonomic chair, booted up PyCharm, and spent my lunch break writing a brand new, highly aggressive Python script. The new script was simple but devastatingly effective. Moving forward, anytime a middle manager sits on a high-priority engineering deliverable in their inbox for more than 4 hours without submitting it to the client, the script automatically sends a blind carbon copy of the raw file directly to the CEO's personal assistant, completely bypassing the manager's ability to artificially bottleneck the workflow. Am I the monster here for completely annihilating my boss's entire career with a string of cryptographic code, or did he get exactly what he deserved for trying to steal my intelligence to feed his own corporate greed?
If you have made it this far and want to see more videos like this, then kindly subscribe and turn on notifications so you may never miss another story like this.